This video is all about servicing and calibrating a torque wrench. This is the torque wrench I've got. I was beginning to worry that the calibration had gone off a lot because I had loose nuts on my car, and compared it with another torque wrench, something like this. It's probably a bit more reliable and less likely to go off torque setting, and this one seems to be about £20 foot off. So I'll show you a cheap way of calibrating it using any old bar like that and a nut and bolt. Come to that later, but first of all, before we calibrate it, it's worth dismantling and checking that it is all operating properly, because what can happen is the grease inside can dry up and the clicking mechanism gets a bit sticky. So here we go through dismantling this type of torque wrench. A lot of ones are very similar, but if yours is different, just follow the same basic principles of trying to analyse how it all comes apart. So I've taken off the little handle hook that's on the lock nut at the end. This is used for locking the torque setting as you turn this part to set the torque. So I'll go through first of all dismantling it. These are the sort of tools you need. This set is only needed for grabbing that fairly lightly. You don't want to squash that apart too much, and undoing this nut at the end. This is a lock nut which locks the calibration of the torque wrench. So we take off that lock nut. The calibration, or the torque setting, is actually set by the rotation. Let's see if it will turn. I'll have to back it all the way off. Actually set by the rotation of this part at the end. There we go. As that turns, it compresses the internal spring by various degrees, which sets the amount of torque that you've got. So what we've got to do is fully back off and unscrew that torque setting piece of metal, and in order to do that we have to both screw that in at the same time as you screw this out, like so, and then we can screw that all the way down. It's no longer connected to the spring. Doing that allows us then to expose this little screw. So with the screw undone, we can then unscrew the lock nut at the end, like so. You can see how that's held in by the screw. The adjusting nut comes off. Be careful of these little pieces of metal here. These little, what do you call them, little rod things that lock in to the end of our plunger when you tighten the lock nut. See how easily they fall out, and they only go one way round. They're more curved on, well, they go both ways round, but they're more curved on one side than the other. So carefully with that to one side. Actually put it that way up so that we don't lose the pieces, and then we can unscrew the torque adjusting outside part, like so. Now you see this plunger is held by this tiny little rod here, and to allow us to get a good grip on that, we'll start dismantling it from the other end now. So we need to take this part out, which is held by this piece of metal. Normally I have a circlip on the end here, but I lost that a while ago, so I just use a piece of wire to grab around that shaft. Take the shaft out. This then lifts out, and then you can push the plunger further down, which then allows us to pull out that little piece of metal, which then allows the plunger to come out, followed by the spring, followed by the end piece. Again, this has got ball bearings, so carefully you don't lose those. This is a little roller shaft, this is all normally all greased up, and this should rotate freely, but what can happen, and has happened quite a lot on here, is the grease can dry out and make it all lumpy, and sometimes your clicking can stop. And just show you how it normally, whoa, nearly lost the ball bearing. That just shows how easy it is. Pop those over there. I think the other one's going to come out quite so easily, but I'll keep my finger on that. So just show you how it operates. This is pushed onto the rod under a spring pressure, and as the rod has torque applied to it. This tries to move in that way direction. A little roller bearing flips over that rod, makes a clicking noise against the side of the shaft, and that's the clicking you feel from the torque wrench. This should be nicely lubricated so that it moves smoothly, and also needs to be, of course, the right way around when we assemble it, because it wouldn't do any good if it was that way around. So that's it all apart. Then we again need to get some grease. A lithium grease would do, but it's probably not too critical what sort of grease you use. Could use a molybdenum grease or whatever, as long as it moves smoothly. It's not something that has a lot of heat or has to be long lasting, so any sort of pressure, any sort of grease would do. So that's it all apart. We'll grease it up, reassemble it, and then we'll come on to calibrating. I'll also mention, you normally have the hole down the side with a plug on it, comes out, and that gives you access to this little adjusting screw, for which you need a hex key if you do want to adjust it of the right sort of setting, whatever size, not quite that one but the next one, this one here. That basically sets the position of this bar so that it's correctly lined up with the roller, so the spring actually forces the bar back into its normal position after the torque is removed. So if it's not working correctly, you might need to adjust the position of that stop. That's just a matter of trial and error, making sure that it always returns back to its normal position. So used a little bit of moly grease here to apply some grease. Lithium grease is just as good, I would have thought, but I had this handy, so we use some molybdenum grease. The ball bearing back in. Don't want to completely saturate it with grease, because we don't want it to stop it making the clicking noise, but that's sufficiently greased up. Up a little bit over the end as well. As I say, if you've got any old sticky old grease, wipe that off first. So that's that, and then make sure we get it installed in the right way around. We'll go in both ways, but the adjusting screw needs to be over that hole, so put that back in. Shaft back on, and because we haven't got the circlip, I'm just going to use a bit of wire to hold that in place, and then we'll actually tighten that up later so it doesn't come off. So apply a little bit of grease and the plunger, and a little bit around these threads where the torque adjuster is going to go. That's all ready for assembly, and next job is to insert the plunger. So have a look down the end, see which way, you know which way the end of the bar is aligned. We want this part of the plunger mechanism to go in that way round, as we discussed earlier. So I'll try and keep that straight. Insert the spring without rotating it, and insert the plunger on top. Now, if it's all assembled correctly, but just by pushing down with your thumb and applying a little bit of twisting action to the end in a clockwise direction, like you're trying to do up a nut, you should hear that clicking noise, and the act of pushing down your thumb should make it return back to normal. If you find you've got to twist it anti-clockwise in order to get it back to the other position, then adjust this nut to get you the right position, so that pushing down on here does always push the bar back to its normal operating position. So ours does that, so we'll put that plug back in again. And then it's all down to adjusting and reassembly. So we have got to put our little piece of metal back in that slot there, which stops the plunger from coming out. That piece of metal is held in position, of course, by this one. So we can put that on top, screw that all the way in. So the assembly is basically a reverse operation of disassembly. And then got to make sure these pieces of metal are still in place, which they are. and that goes on the end, followed by the lock nut mechanism, which we screw on until you can just about see the recess in the end lines up with the hole with our screwdriver. Tighten that up, like so. Then back off with the adjuster until we start to meet calibration nut, and make sure the threads line up correctly. And I think we'll apply a little bit of grease to that to help the longevity of it as well, not too much. Right, make sure the threads lined up, and you should be able to just put this on by your fingers. There we go. So you might need to back this off as we're screwing in the end, because if you start to compress the spring, then it's going to get difficult to actually do it up. So it's a matter of screwing this in and screwing that in at the same time, and making sure the lock nut's not on. There we go. There we go. Right. Now it's a matter of adjusting the torque wrench for the correct torque, because the calibration has gone way out because we've undone this nut, which is the way that the thing is calibrated. And to calibrate it, you could either buy some rather expensive, well, £50 worth of electronic calibration tool, or just as accurately, make your own calibration tool. Torque is all about the weight of something, i.e. pounds or kilograms, compared to the distance away from the axis something is. So torque of, let's say, 100 pound-foot would be equivalent to 100 pounds of weight pressing on, for instance, this bar downwards 1 foot away from the axis. That turning force on the nut represented or given by that 100 pounds is 100 pound-foot. Now the further away down the bar you go, the more leverage effect you're going to get. So if you had 50 pounds 2 foot away, because you're 2 foot away, you've got double the leverage. So 50 pounds doubled up gives you 100 pound-foot of torque on this particular nut. And the way to calibrate your torque wrench would be to get something simple. I've got an old bar that was lying around, mounted a nut and bolt on the end. Could use anything you've got handy, really, even a piece of wood if it's strong enough, as long as you can get the nut and bolt to hold on the end. I've tightened this nut and bolt to about 120-130 pound-foot as far as I could tell. Get something at the right socket, the right sort of size. Now you want something underneath, either a nut and bolt, piece of wood, whatever, that lines up exactly across the axis of the nut and bolt, so we know where our leverage position is. Then we take our torque wrench and apply it over here. Then we need to get some weights to rest over the end. Now for the weights, you need to know, of course, the weight of them. So I've got a collection of weights here. One from my exercise machine, which are something like 5 kilograms each, and some dumbbells which say they're 2.5 kilograms. So I've got a collection of different weight machines just to make sure they're all well calibrated and all giving the same reading. Circular mechanical one, a body weight machine, digital. Is that working? Oh, turn on. All the set up in kilograms because it's easiest. And an electronic weight machine, which we just need to calibrate. And also make sure they're on a flat surface. So I've gone through and weighed all these, so I know all the exact weights. For instance, 2.4 kilograms. 2.4 kilograms, and so on. Or at least within 10%. Probably actually is much more accurate. So the accuracy of your torque measurement is going to depend on the accuracy of your weight measurement. And well, either you could buy some precision weights used perhaps in the kitchen. You might have them already, or just take something that weighs, even a pile of bricks. As long as you weigh it on a weigh machine, then you know what the weight is. That's going to be as accurate as your weight measurement. So take the weights, and I would suggest strapping a few together, whatever weight you want, with a piece of wire, and then we'll hang it over our bar. The other thing we've got to take into account is the actual weight of the bar itself, which has a certain contribution towards the torque, because obviously as you try and turn that bar in order to lift it, there's a certain amount of torque you have to apply. So we can work out what that torque is by measuring the weight of the bar, waiting for that to come on, and measure the distance between the centre of where our bolt's going to go and the midpoint of the bar, which we'll measure with the tape measure in a minute. 1.52 kilograms. Got 1.5 kilograms pushing down a distance of 0.395 meters away from our bolt hole. So the torque would then be 1.52 times 0.395, which equals 0.6. So we've got 0.6 kilogram meters of additional torque from the length and weight, primarily weight of the bar. So we add that to the additional torque due to our weights, which we'll work out in a minute, to give us our total torque setup. Right, next we set up and measure the amount of torque our weights are going to contribute. So our weight is 4.9 kilograms of these dumbbells, and we're at a distance from our axis point of 0.73 meters, 0.73 meters. So our torque therefore is 4.9 times 0.73, which equals 3.58 kilogram meters, or meters kilograms. And so our total torque is torque from the bar, from the torque added to the torque from the weights, which is then 0.6 plus that, so it's then 4.18. Then for a starting position at least, try and set up on our torque wrench 4.18, so 4.2 meters, or if you want to do it in pound foot, the conversion factor from kilogram meters is 1 kilogram meter equals 7.233 pound foot. So 4.18 times 7.233 equals 30.2 pound foot. So quite a low torque setting to start with. Let's see if that agrees. 4.2, 30 pound foot. Yep. So we're set up for 30. We can add more weight later to calibrate or test it at higher torque. But what we need to do then is put something, support, like a bolt or a piece of tube like I've got here, right under the axis point of our socket and torque wrench, and push down until we start to lift. So we're getting clicking at that position. So keep tightening this up or slackening it off with your hand as required until you're at the point where it's just, the weight is just starting to lift and it's just starting to click. That's near enough at the same time. Which is about there. So to adjust the torque, you need to adjust the piece of metal at the end. You should be able to just turn it by hand. To get a higher torque, then obviously you screw in. Make sure this lock nut is undone. So as you turn the handle, this piece of metal should stay in the same position with respect to this other piece of metal you're turning. So if we've got a reading on here at the point it clicks, in this case slightly over 30, then we also want it to click, we instead want it to click at the 30 position, so we have to turn anti-clockwise to go back to the 30. So to get to the same clicking position, we're also going to have to turn this screw in by roughly the same amount as we've turned this to get back from our 35 to 30 or whatever is on. So let's just see where we are now. Keep adjusting it until it just starts to lift and click at the same time, which is roughly there, and we're almost exactly on 30 pound-foot. So I was just measuring the torque next at some higher torque settings, or whatever torque is most relevant for the sort of job you're doing. You can only set up the calibration for one torque position, but it's useful to know what the actual torque is at the different extremes of torque measurement, so you can manually adjust in your head later. And put on the lock nut to lock that adjusting position in to its permanently calibrated position. Make sure that you don't turn the calibration piece as you're doing it. You could apply the lock nut, I guess. Tighten the two up, then tighten the lock nut firmly with the wrenches that we used earlier, put the handle on, and then job done. And interestingly, comparing the torque with our other torque wrench, which is the bendy bar sort, confirms the torque is as we've set up on the bar, which is quite nice to know. These may not be so accurate in terms of the last pound-foot of torque measurement, but very much less likely to go out of calibration, because it just relies on the physics of a piece of metal bending rather than an adjustment screw or a spring going out. So it's nice to know the torque correlates, and the way we calculated the torque seems to be accurate. The other thing worth mentioning about torque wrenches, as being the possible reason they go out of calibration, is it's all too easy to put your torque wrench away when it's set to the previous torque that you use. You know, if it's particularly if it's 100 pound-foot, then that's a lot of spring compression, a lot of compression staying on the spring while it's away for possibly months or even years. And so obviously the spring will then tend to stay more in its compressed state, and the calibration will go out. So before you put it away, it's best, probably almost essential, to put it back to the 0 torque setting, and then the spring isn't compressed and it will stay in calibration longer. Useful tip. So that's how to calibrate your torque wrench for free, with just tools and bits of stuff that's lying around the house or the garage. If you do have to buy something like a bar, this piece of metal will probably only cost a few quid from a local metal merchant. Far better than either buying a calibration tool, which is probably 2 or 3 times the price of a new torque wrench anyhow, or sending your torque wrench away for calibration, which again is more than the price of a torque wrench. So there we go, how to do it on the cheap. Thanks, bye.